Asking the seller to pay for your closing costs can be a great way for you to buy a home with less money out of your pocket. However, is asking the seller to pay closing cost credits actually hurting your chances of buying a home? What's going on, guys? My name is Rob Bailey, realtor in the Chicagoland area with Arnie Realty Inc. And today I'll be talking about seller closing credits. So what exactly is a seller closing credit? A seller closing credit is basically when the seller gives you some money at the closing in order to pay for some of the expenses, such as the closing costs that come from your loan, or maybe there were some repairs that the seller didn't want to do, so they instead offer you this closing credit so you can take care of those repairs yourself. Seller closing credits have been actually pretty popular up until recently when the real estate market just exploded and it became a heavy seller's market. Once that happened, all of a sudden, sellers weren't as willing to give a seller closing credit as they were before. Here's a quick example of how a seller closing credit works. Say a seller has a home for sale for $200,000. You want to offer them $200,000, but you don't quite have the funds in your bank account to be able to cover all the closing costs that comes with that. So what you do is you offer the seller $210,000 and ask the seller for a $10,000 closing credit. That way, the seller gets the $200,000 that they were looking for, and the seller gives you back $10,000 at closing, which is $10,000 less that you have to have in your pocket. Of course, when this happens, keep in mind that that $10,000 isn't free money. You're actually financing that extra $10,000 over the 30 years of the loan. Why were seller credits so popular in the first place? Well, for buyers, it's pretty obvious. For buyers, it's less money that you have to bring to the closing table. Even with all the first-time homebuyer programs out there, in order to close a home, you're probably going to need somewhere within tens of thousands of dollars. And let's face it, not all of us have that in the bank account. So by getting a seller credit, that's less money that you have to bring for the table, and that makes it easier for you to buy a home. For sellers, it actually helps for the deal to be able to close more. A lot of buyers may be able to get pre-approved for the loan, but they might not have the cash in their bank account to be able to close. The seller can offer that closing credit in order to make it easier for the buyer to be able to close and better ensure that the deal actually closed and the seller gets their money at the end of the day. For the seller, they really don't care about paying a closing credit. They only care about the money that they net. So as long as they're able to net the money that they're looking for, they'll give you as big of a credit as they have to. Sellers really didn't have an issue with offering buyers a closing cost credit until 2021 when the real estate market just blew up. Now it's such a heavy seller's market and the competition for homes is just so high that sellers don't really feel the need to offer that anymore, so they aren't as willing to do so. They don't have to. There are plenty of buyers out there nowadays that have the cash and don't need to ask for that closing cost credit. Now, put the two loans side by side. You have a loan that is asking for credit and a loan that doesn't ask for credit. The seller's going to pick the one that doesn't ask for the credit every time. While before, sellers didn't mind offering a closing credit to close the deal, now when the seller sees a closing credit, they see a buyer that isn't as financially stable as compared to a buyer that doesn't need that closing cost credit. When the buyer isn't as stable, there's a chance that the loan could fall apart and the seller ends up wasting their time. Sellers used to deal with that before 2021 because that's just the way it was. They kind of had to because that was pretty much every buyer. But now that the competition is so high and there are so many offers and they're getting so many buyers, they don't have to deal with that anymore. So they're now choosing the option of not having to offer that credit. This is in turn making it harder for people to ask for that seller closing cost credit because, like I said before, the seller just isn't as willing to do so. Because of this, buyers need to be real careful when asking the seller for a closing cost credit. Keep in mind also that if you're a buyer that needs a seller closing cost credit in order to close the loan, that actually means that you aren't pre-approved for as much as your letter says. So for example, if you have a $200,000 pre-approval loan, but you need a $10,000 credit from the seller, you can't offer that seller $200,000. The most you can really offer that seller is $190,000. So that's also something that you need to think about when looking at homes. Another thing that buyers need to watch out for is they can actually end up losing out on some money if they bid too far over the listing price. Here's a quick example. Say you found a home that is for sale for $200,000 and you bid $210,000 and ask for that $10,000 closing cost credit. You go through the deal and everything is going fine until you pay for the appraisal. Now the appraisal comes back and says the home is only worth $200,000. That means that the lender will only be willing to give you $200,000, not $210,000. This means that now if the seller gives you that $10,000 closing credit, the seller only gets $190,000 instead of the $200,000 that they wanted. If that happens, the seller can then back out of the deal and just go for somebody who's going to give them the price that they're looking for. That means that you've wasted your money not only on the appraisal that you had to pay for, but the inspection that you had to pay for as well. So that's something that you really, once again, need to think about when you're asking for a seller closing credit, especially when you're offering over the listing price and asking for a seller closing credit. So in conclusion, seller closing credits can be a really great way for you to buy a home and not have to bring as much money to the closing table. However, there are some pitfalls that you need to look out for, so you can't just go crazy asking for closing credits like you could before. The market is just simply too hot now, and there are too many buyers out there that aren't asking for a seller closing credit. So make sure to keep that in mind and save up as much money as you can so you can be better equipped to buy the home of your dreams once you run into it. Alright guys, that's my video on selling closing credits. Any questions or comments, feel free to leave a comment below or reach out to me at my website, which is BaileyAcresProperties.com. Once again, my name is Rob Bailey, realtor in the Chicagoland area with Arnie Realty Inc. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good day.